So before we get into the conversation, I'm gonna let the panelists introduce themselves, and maybe we just start with our name, our country of origin, represent, what we do in the industry, and what Black history means to you as an Afro-Latino.
My name is Alexis Garcia. I'm a writer, director, producer. I hail from the great island of Puerto Rico, and Black History Month is such an important opportunity to celebrate our origins, our roots. It's important to celebrate our history, literally. And so it's just a moment of reflection for me personally, and in the work that I do, I've had the opportunity to create content around Black History Month specifically for the Latinx community, and I always am learning something new. And it's just when you're able to connect with our own personal histories, it's like you get inspired by those stories, and that I think is, you know, one of the best things about BHM.
Hey, what's up, y'all? It's Allen Maldonado. I'm an artist by way of Compton and Rialto. I'm Black and Puerto Rican. I've been in over 100 TV shows, films, and cartoons. Writer for television series such as Survivor's Remorse, The Last OG. Sold a couple shows to Netflix and Fox, and doing a lot of things. Directing my first feature this year, along with directing numerous shorts. I launched a short film app several years ago, which is now the model for all of these flash channels. So I was ahead of my time, but yeah, just an overall artist, and happy to be here to discuss some things with y'all. My mother's from the south of, from Alabama, from Raymer, south of Montgomery. So a lot of things that people are privy to now, I heard from actual people that experienced them. Being from the South, being that my mother walked out of middle school when Martin Luther King was assassinated. My grandmother dealt with segregation, and they had to walk. All of those sort of tales of walking 10 to 15 miles to school, they actually lived it. And on rainy days, the kids on the bus and the white bus driver would purposely splash mud with them. So I got the experience to witness these stories and see the pain in these individuals' eyes. So Black history is not, it's Black reality to me. So it's more than February. It's something that is sort of embedded in my DNA that I've been educated since I was a child. So this month is every day for me.
Hello everyone, my name is Eliana Reyes. I am Puerto Rican and Dominican. I was born in New York, grew up mostly in Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic, and then I ended up in the Midwest in Minnesota. So I have a very interesting experience with being Black and Latina. And I'm an actor first, performer first. I have a spoken word background. And you know, because of the need of creating the things that I wanted to be a part of, I eventually ended up becoming a director, EP, and my day job, to pay the bills, because you'll learn that in Hollywood, is I'm a showrunner at a Latino media company called Latin Nation. I run the Afro-Latino pillar, so I create all of the Black and Latino content, and it's been a joyous and also challenging process to do that, simply because you almost kind of have to convince people that there's a space that's needed for that, and that's kind of part of my everyday work. And so with that being said, I think Black history for me, like you said, is something that is an everyday thing, but specifically to celebrate it loudly and proudly is a form of resistance and a form of kind of, in the most celebratory way, saying you're not gonna erase us, you're not gonna erase our roots, you're not gonna erase the origin of our people. And yeah, that's how I feel.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
My name is Shenny, and my family's from DR originally, but I was raised in Florida, and so kind of tying the answer of what Black History Month means to me, it really is about reflecting how Black people, Black Caribbean people navigate Florida and survive Florida and that relationship to the islands and being back home. I actually just made an experimental short that's screening at the MoCA right now in LA that honors Mama Tingo, who was a Black Dominican farmer who was murdered protecting her land, but it also pays way in tribute to Trayvon Martin and his legacy in Florida. So all of my work sort of reflects how Black people survive, how we grieve our people, how Mother Nature grieves us. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
I think Allen mentioned that it does get really complex. And as most of us know, like in this industry, like I said earlier, which is why conversations like this are so necessary, because we don't see a lot of Afro-Latino content. We don't see a lot of representation amongst, like, if you put BTS behind the scenes, in front of the screens, there's so much work that needs to be done. Like, in my opinion, I feel like we moved the needle a little tiny bit, but we have so much more work to do in this space. And so to that point, when we talk about the complexities, like, how realistically do you navigate those complexities being Afro-Latino in an industry that likes to categorize people into one box? Like, it doesn't make sense that you're like three identities, right? Like, how do you navigate those complexities and educate people and have empathy, but at the same time stay true to your Afro-Latinidad in an industry that wants to say, no, you are this, like this one thing?
Yeah, I think it's crazy because up until like 10 years ago, we didn't have a word for it.
Right.
Even. We didn't even know
Man.
that we could be categorized as Afro-Latinos. You know, that I think was a big kind of world's opening revelation for all of us. In that, you know, I've always moved within the community of Latinidad, but I was always the Black one in that space, and it's almost like you're a double minority because you're not seen and you're not visible. You're not visible on the screen. You're not visible behind the scenes. And so I think not having the awareness about it, in a way, it worked in my favor, because I'm just like, this is what I want to do, and these are the people I want to see because they look like my family, and this is, you know, I'm on the mission to do this work. But then when you do become aware and you're like, oh, wow, this is shocking. This is fucked up. You realize that there are many barriers to entry in the industry. The first and foremost are economic barriers, which many of us in this room have and will face throughout our trajectory of our careers. And then there are actual barriers to because of your identity and because of the ethnic group from which you move within, and so having to overcome, like, first this one barrier, then this next thing, and then it is. I say thank God that we've developed a community now, because we can support each other and we can uplift each other, and the awareness and the knowledge is power. It's because it's like you really can't do this alone. You can't be a storyteller in a vacuum. You need your community to support you and uplift you in that work.
For me, like she said, 10 years ago, Afro-Latino, I didn't even know. I was just naive, man. I didn't even know, like,
Black and I'm Latino.
yeah, like, for real. And you know, I grew up, again, my mother's Black, and I grew up in the hood, and I grew up as the Black dude with just good hair, and and you know, and finding my way through Hollywood and just fighting for a role. I didn't even really understand what I even represented until I was representing it. Being on, you know, Blackish, being on Last OG, being on all of these TV shows, I didn't really understand that there was a kid that was Black and Puerto Rican or Afro-Latino looking at me and me being an example. It was kind of thrusted upon me like, I didn't even know I was even doing this, just being lost in the idea of just trying to perform and showcase my ability. So a lot of my success in sort of ignorance to even what I was up against, it was just being naive. I just was trying to get a job. Trying to get a job and be the best person that I could be in front of the camera, and in turn I have had so many people come up to me and look up to all the things that I have been doing sort of as a trailblazer in this space. And it's been exciting to know that, again, that third tribe that I didn't know I was representing as far as being Afro-Latino is what I'm doing through my work. So it's new, I guess, like she said, it's new to us. And as far as what we're representing. So with that being said, being more sort of focused on representing this diaspora is been sort of my motivation in knowing that this actually exists in my work.
I want to add to that because I went to Minnesota straight from Puerto Rico, right? And in Puerto Rico, I was just una Puertorriqueña morenita, right? And same in DR. And when I got to Minneapolis, I went to school in North Minneapolis. I went to school in the hood, and everybody was like, "Oh, the black girl that speaks Spanish, the black girl with the Spanish accent." And I was always like, "Yeah, you know, like I'm black." And then I'd be like, they'd be like, "Oh, but what are you mixed with?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm Puerto Rican and Dominican." They'd be like, "Oh, where is that?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's in the Caribbean, right?" So then all of a sudden I had this new identity outside of Puerto Rico, and then, you know, because in New York too, everybody knows, like, you're in New York, we're everywhere, right? So in the Midwest, really, when it was like I had to learn the language of identifying as black, but then also as Latina, and then it really hit me when I started modeling and acting, where I wanted to submit. I remember, especially being in the Midwest, you don't see a lot of content where they speak Spanish, right? Spanish is my first language, and that was really hard for people to comprehend in Minnesota. They couldn't get around, like, why are you black, why are you melanated, and why do you speak Spanish? And so my agent literally was like, "Oh, I can't submit you for Latina roles because you're not what they're looking for when they want Latina roles. I have to submit you for ethnically ambiguous or for black roles." And I was like, "Well, what the F is ethnically ambiguous? That sounds like a microaggression." I digress. But, you know, but then I was just like, oh, that, and then also being in the Midwest and being around Latinos that weren't Caribbean Latinos, I was kind of othered from those communities. So a lot of, you know, Mexicans, Ecuadorians, Central Americans are in the Midwest, and they would be like, "Oh, like, hablas español?" Like, "Oh, pero tú eres negra." And I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Y hablo español," you know? And so it was, that's when I kind of realized it. So when I came to LA, I got signed here to model and act, and I kind of heard the same thing from my agents here of like, "Oh, you know, like, Latina is a certain type of thing, but, you know, now we have this Afro-Latina thing, so when we see castings coming from Afro-Latina, we'll totally submit you." And so the way that I deal with it is creating the space that I wish I had, right? And I think that's important, and I think everybody should feel empowered to be like, if they don't want to give you a seat at the table, you just build your own damn table, right? And then you invite other people that are less seen than you. You open the doors for those that are even more disenfranchised than you are. And so that's what I've kind of made my purpose, to be here. But social discourse is really the way that I go about it. The shows that I run are talk shows, and I'm also creating content and docuseries around these topics of identity, culture, and everything around it. But the way that I approach this conversation is like something that someone I admire a lot said in an interview, and it's like, a lot of people, when they think about blackness, they think about where the boats landed. They don't think about where the boats originated, where it came from, right? So if you understand the slave trade, if you understand what happened to our ancestors, you understand that we all come from the same place, right? We just landed at different places in different times. And so when you look at the diaspora of blackness, when you look at it from that point, and you understand that from the originating point, people ended up in Brazil, they ended up in the Caribbean, they ended up in the US, they ended up even somehow in Asia, right? Down in Central America, then you understand that within this diaspora of blackness, there are several groups of different identities. And I think once you understand that fundamental idea, then we can have conversations around the complexities of our cultural nuances. And so that's how I try to approach it.
These were also beautiful, so I'm just kind of sitting with all of that. I think what's coming up for me is actually like, what is the source of why I create? And I think it first starts with my mother wounds and wanting to heal that inner child. My mom has a Black Dominican mother and a white Dominican father, and I think there was never really language for how she was living in that. And so it just started from there, you know, being able to find that language within myself, to show my mother who she is, to give her that language through the work. And it also allowed me to preserve my grandmother's dialect. My grandmother was born in 1938 in a small campo that they call Navas in DR, and she never learned how to read or write. So having a documentary of her where her accent that's never been touched by an institution can be preserved in that way, I think is so important. So I don't really care how the industry sees me or how they identify me or what they're curious about. I'm really interested in tapping into people like Zora Neale Hurston, who was able to alchemize language, alchemize culture, and preserve it in this work so that it lives forever. I'm more interested in making timeless peace, you know, timeless work that we can come back to, so we can remember my grandmother, we can remember what that dialect sounded like. So that's what comes up for me.
I do want to pivot into breaking into the industry, because obviously everyone sitting here, we work in entertainment in some capacity, right? So when we talk about, when we go back to the origin, like our first job in entertainment, our first gig, our first exposure moment into entertainment, were there challenges? Because we did talk about barriers and challenges. So did you have barriers and challenges present? What were they? And then how did you navigate or overcome that breaking into this industry?
Well, I'll start off like, I've been doing this over 20 years. My first role was Friday After Next.
Wow.
And look, wow. It was a long time ago. And I'll say, like, I remember having one audition a year. And again, I was just very naive on delusional is the best way to describe it, because for anybody trying to get in this business, there's no one way to do it. There's no instruction you can follow that will guarantee you success in that. I don't care if you white, black, green, purple, yellow with spots. It's like entertainment is, but that's what it makes everyone such. It's such a desirable place to be, because there is no one way to do it. So for me, the challenges were to always know that this is a marathon and not a sprint. To know that every day is a day that I can get better at my skill, my talent, my craft, my ability, and my desire to pursue this business. Because my rule of thumb is I don't care about people saying yes. I want to make it hard as hell for you to say no. That is always my position, just because I know people will want to say no even when they want to say yes.
Can you repeat that?
So,
Bring that back.
Like I want to make it difficult for anybody that see me or see my talent to say no.
Wow.
So that is what every day to spend, again, my first 10 years going from one line to like no line. Friday After Next, that wasn't even my voice. They ADR'd somebody else's voice. They ADR'd. So no line to one line to 5 line to 10 line to guest star. From co-star to guest star to being the number one on the call sheet for a show called Sneakerheads. Like I literally went through every step of this, and it has made me the entertainer and the artist that I now can stand confidently on being at the top of the mountain, because life, this entertainment, your own sort of how you envision yourself will knock you off the top of that mountain. And you got to know how to get back up there. I've been in this game 20 years, and I've seen people in the top spots. I've seen people be the star of all stars and get knocked off and never find their way back, just because a lot of them were placed there. A lot of them they just found themselves in the opportunity, and it just blossomed to success. And when you're not blue hot no more, now you got to really go in these rooms and be talented and go in these rooms, and a lot of people lose sight and lose themselves and to get discouraged and don't find that be resilient enough to survive those seasons when you're not the hot thing. So So that's sort of my advice, is that make it hard for people to say no to you.
I just knew how to tell stories because I was that little girl that would lock myself in my room as a kid and just tell myself stories, which led me to spoken word. And spoken word really is what allowed me to understand how to make someone feel something in narrating a story or narrating something. But the one thing I want to reiterate is that it doesn't matter what you believe in. Something like this requires a lot of faith, and it is somewhat of a spiritual journey in that you're gonna have to trust wherever life takes you and surrender to that, because you have to understand that if you are consistent in what your goal is and what you're trying to manifest, then you know that you don't know more than the powers that be. So understand that whatever journey you're personally taken on is gonna land you where you're supposed to be. It might not look like the way that you want it to look, right? But when you take ego out of the way and you allow yourself to navigate life in that way, you will probably end up somewhere even better than you could even imagine. I was a project manager at the Federal Reserve of Minnesota, okay? I was in a completely different place, but those skills of having my fingers on a lot of different moving pieces succinctly is exactly what I need to be an executive producer. It's exactly what I need to be a showrunner. It's exactly what I needed to direct my first feature film, right? And you combine that with your storytelling, your passion for storytelling, you kind of have you're alchemizing some really, really unique magic. So embrace your natural talent, understand that your journey is gonna look very different, and do not resist where life is naturally taking you. Like, trust that. And just remember what your North Star is, like what you're here for. And you will land there a million ways better than you could have imagined. People like to work with who they know, and they like to be comfortable. So get uncomfortable, be comfortable being uncomfortable. And when you look around your table of writers, your table of producers, if you're lacking melanin, then you need to change something. Because that's just not an accurate reflection of the world. And this isn't about, oh, just do it because of people of color. No, it's that if you're creating something that involves a narrative that is not one of your own, you need to make sure that the table, the room, the producers, everything represents that through and through, inside and out. And that's how you're gonna touch the community that you wanna reach, and that's how you're authentically creating. It's also how you're gonna create work for people. So yeah, don't do stuff you don't know about. Or have people help you.
Authenticity is key. And also, I want to say that, like, when you say write what you know, oftentimes people think that their lives are like not that interesting, so they try and write about what they don't know, and they're like, oh, this is what's hot right now, let me write about this thing. But truly, like, the way that your grandmother washes dishes is probably more interesting than any other way you can invent. So, like, embrace these really specific things about yourself and your identity and the way that you grew up and your culture, wherever you come from, and tell those stories, because that's what the world needs. We need that kind of, like, material. That authenticity is what is the soul power that drives these stories, that drives connection. So I just want to encourage people.
And you want to make your script bulletproof. My experience from running and working in writers' rooms is that I remember being in a room and 3 of the writers weren't even writers. They were just specific to the genre that we were writing. Like, it was just people that got an opportunity because they experienced what we're writing about. If it's a cop show, we got a cop in there. Like who better to tell us when you're being insensitive in certain areas. So that is very important. And what I've learned in building healthy writing rooms is it's about making sure your script is bulletproof and that you're not overlooking or overstepping certain areas, because these are your blind spots. So a good leader is someone that can find and understand they have blind spots and put people in position to make sure you don't.
Yeah, just quickly adding to that, like, I do believe in write what you know, but write what you're dreaming about, write what you're interested in, write what you're curious about, because I was interested in writing about protecting the land, but I only knew so much, and so I had to go out and talk to farmers, and through that process of conversations and I guess intentional interviews, did the work get more specific, and I learned about the importance of controlled burns. And that became a focal point of the story that wasn't there before. So invite people into your process who are actually living the thing that you're curious about. You should be exploring other things beyond what you know. This is an opportunity for us to educate ourselves, expand our imagination. So don't limit yourself, but obviously be intentional and respectful. So that's what comes up.
And cultural nuance is important too, right? If you're gonna write something as complex as Latinidad or Afro-Latinidad, understand that Panamanian culture, very different to Dominican culture, very different to Guatemalan culture, very different to Puerto Rican culture, right? Even the accents and the dialects of how we speak Spanish, the words, like some words in Puerto Rico are a bad word in Dominican Republic, and the islands are right next to each other, right? So educate yourselves on that, on those cultural nuances, so that you can accurately represent these communities and these people and these stories that you're trying to tell.
I'm a film production student and with the emphasis in producing. And I had a question for Alexis. First of all, congrats on the opportunity to direct your first feature film. Like, those words alone is just like the dream right now, so congratulations on that. Earlier you shared about your experience of going from a director's assistant and then finally directing your own short film. And I was curious to know about how was that experience of filming your first short film, and from release, how was the journey from there to your next opportunity to direct?
When I finally was able to direct, I felt like I had all of the tools necessary to be able to run my own production. We made it with very little money. I think that's the unfortunate reality of like first-time short filmmakers, is that you're working with very limited resources. And that was of course a challenge because everyone was working for free, and that's honestly the worst feeling in the world when you're not like paying people to come and do something, but you realize too that like so many people are interested, or you know, they see your passion and they're motivated by that. And so as the director specifically, you do have to hold up that passion for everyone else in those first kind of like, I mean, forever, really. It's like you're the one that is the visionary, and you're driving the vision. And after I made that short, I couldn't afford to give it a real festival run, because like, listen, when you make a short, you gotta have money to put it in festivals. It's a whole thing. It's a racket almost, like $50 here, $70 there. And everyone applies to Sundance, and 1% gets it. And so it's like, if you don't get into Sundance, what do you do? I ended up premiering this film. It was about a military veteran. My brothers are veterans, and one of my brothers was, to process his experiences in Afghanistan, was writing short stories, and he would send them to me. And when I read one, I was like, oh my God, this plays just like a short film. And I was like, why don't we make this? And so that's how that first film came about. But after I made that film, I was like, yes, I finally did it. Now I'll get hired to direct a TV show. And it was crickets. Like, I had to work at a temp agency for 9 months. And while I was working at a temp agency, I was actively applying to jobs. And thankfully I had that short, because it became like the portfolio that got me the job, that got me, you know. And the ladder from being an assistant to becoming a director is impossible unless you actually direct something. And for those of you that are, you know, creating films here in school, you're gonna leave school with products that are actually, you know, stuff to prove that you can do this work. Unfortunately, I didn't have that, and so like I had to direct something. I directed my first real short film, and that got me a job in digital, and I ended up in digital for 7 years. And I worked at Univision first, and then I moved to BuzzFeed. And during my time at BuzzFeed was when I was like really honing the craft of like, even though it's short form digital stuff, which all of you know about, is like you're turning out content, and you're really learning how to tell a story. You're using data-driven feedback to be able to tell better stories, and that's all like accessible stuff right now for all of you in the audience. If you're like trying to figure out what your voice is and trying to find yourself as an author of creative content, like that's things that you can, those are tools in your toolbox that you could be using to become better storytellers.
Whether you're someone who has access to the opportunities or not, you should always be ready because you don't know when they are going to come. I do believe in equity. I do believe in, if you're in a position to help, to mentor, to inform, to drop other people's names in rooms of opportunities. People have done it for me after I invested in those relationships. And I think, you know, it's this thing of like the iceberg, right? Everybody sees the tip of the iceberg, but they don't understand how big and dense and thick the iceberg is under the water. I was like freelance producing, whatever, like a lot of times you don't get paid right away and you're struggling or things just aren't working out. And I still, I remember there was a moment where I was in such a dark time, right? And also facing eviction. I think everyone has that story of like, well, rent ain't getting paid this month. You know what I'm saying? They're just gonna have to wait. And I got this super unique invitation to this huge red carpet. And I literally had this like old fashioned Nova dress that I had never worn that I got for free. It was like buy one, get one free. And I had these little Amazon shoes. And thankfully I know how to do my makeup and clean up. And my curls weren't even curling right. And I slicked my hair back and I was like, girl, you're gonna go to this event. And then I went and I was not feeling my best. I wasn't considering myself successful. I was nowhere where I am now. But I went to that space and I met amazing people that to this day, that particular act of showing up, even when I was exhausted, when I wasn't feeling like myself, when my account was not good, I showed up. Not for them, I showed up for myself. I showed up for the possibility of whatever could have been there, which then opened a lot of doors for me because of the conversations and the people that I met that night. And so that just goes to say, like, there's a lot of us that don't get access to opportunities, but because we're ready and because we're focusing on our craft while we're waiting for those opportunities, when it does come, you make sure you take that opportunity, you extend your full hand out and you take it and you run with it and you own it. And so just be ready and show up even when you're tired.
I'm a film production student.